El Cid, man. Just saying the name, it conjures up images, legends. You think of Spanish history, this almost mythical figure. But how much of what we think we know is actually true? That's what I'm really curious about.
It's a real challenge, right, to separate the fact from the fiction, the man from the myth. But that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're diving deep into the life of Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the man who would become El Cid.
A legend, for sure. But every legend has a beginning. So paint the picture for us. It's the 11th century, the Iberian Peninsula. What's going on? This isn't the Spain we see on maps today, is it?
Not even close. This is a time of huge upheaval. Imagine a patchwork of kingdoms, Christian and Muslim, all vying for power. You've got your Christian kingdoms in the north, your Muslim Taifa kingdoms in the south, and everyone's scrambling after the collapse of the Caliphate of Cordoba. It's a recipe for, well, let's just say things are pretty tense.
A real power vacuum. And into this world steps El Cid. What do we know about his early life? Where does this story even begin?
That's where it's interesting. Born around 1040, the specifics of El Cid's early years are, honestly, a bit of a mystery.
A mystery. Come on, spill the tea. What's the dirt?
We know about his father, Diego Leonés, a figure of some importance in King Fernando I's court, but young Rodrigo's upbringing, that's where the historical record gets a little fuzzy, unfortunately.
Okay, so a little shrouded in mystery. But we do know he ends up in King Fernando's court, right?
Exactly. And this is key. Imagine it. Young Rodrigo, maybe in his teens, dropped right into the heart of power. He's not just learning to swing a sword either. We're talking law, literature, diplomacy, the works, a royal education.
Fernando saw something in him, clearly. Potential, maybe?
Potential, for sure. And he quickly starts to make a name for himself. He develops a reputation, especially in those trial by combats, those legally sanctioned duels.
These were no joke. Life or death, right there in the arena.
High stakes, absolutely. But El Cid, he excels. There's this one story, his victory over Jimeno Garcés, champion of Navarre, no less. Not just strength, you see. This showcased his understanding of the law, the social customs. He was already a cut above.
Playing the game and winning.
Strategically. And that's what's crucial here. El Cid wasn't just about brute force. He was smart, knew how to play the political game, understood the importance of having powerful allies.
Which brings us to Prince Sancho, not just Fernando's son, but the heir apparent. This wasn't just some political marriage of convenience.
No, this is a true bond. El Cid becomes Sancho's right-hand man, his alferez. Think about what that means, the trust, the responsibility. These were formative years for El Cid. Sancho's influence, their shared ambition, it would shape his entire worldview.
A powerful duo. But as we know, power can be fleeting. When King Fernando dies, things get, well, messy. He divides the kingdom amongst his sons, which I guess was customary back then. But talk about a recipe for disaster.
It's the classic recipe, isn't it? Sibling rivalry, amplified on a royal scale. Before you know it, it's a full-blown war of succession. And El Cid, he's right in the thick of it, loyal to Sancho.
Loyalty is a powerful thing. So the Siege of Zamora, it feels like a turning point, wouldn't you say? Not just for the war, but for El Cid personally. This is where Prince Sancho, the man he's sworn to, is killed, assassinated. What does that kind of loss do to a person, especially in the midst of all this chaos?
It's a defining moment. His king, his friend, gone. But here's where we see El Cid's pragmatism shine through. He recognizes the situation, understands that power has shifted. So what does he do? He pledges his loyalty to the new king, Alfonso VI, Sancho's brother.
That takes some serious guts, I'd say. Siding with the brother of the man you swore an oath to. That's a bold move.
Bold and smart. He could have easily been cast aside, another casualty of war. Instead, he secures his position, even manages to turn it to his advantage.
Go on, you got my attention. How does he pull that off?
He plays the long game. He arranges a strategic marriage to Jimena Diaz, noble lineage connected to the new king. It's a power move, pure and simple.
From potential exile to the royal family, that's one heck of a turnaround.
El Cid, my friend, was a master of adaptation. But don't think for a second this means a life of luxury at court. Alfonso has plans. He needs someone to navigate the complex world of the Taifas, those Muslim-ruled kingdoms to the south.
Ah, the Taifas. For those of us who haven't spent every waking moment digging into Spanish history, what exactly are we talking about here?
Think of them like this independent Muslim principalities, each with its own ruler, its own agenda. They're constantly vying for power, making and breaking alliances. It's a complex web.
And Alfonso sends El Cid right into the middle of it.
He does, specifically to Seville, one of the most powerful Taifa kingdoms at the time. His mission, to collect the parias, essentially tributes paid by the Taifa to the Christian kings. It's a delicate task, fraught with potential for conflict.
So not exactly a walk in the park.
Not at all. But it's an experience that reveals a fascinating aspect of El Cid. This isn't just about military might. He's immersed in Islamic culture, dealing with Muslim rulers, navigating their customs. He's learning to understand a completely different worldview.
That's something you don't often hear about this period. We tend to view it as very black and white, Christian versus Muslim.
Right. But El Cid's story challenges that. And it's these experiences, these early encounters with Islamic diplomacy, that would shape his later career. He comes back to Alfonso's court with his reputation enhanced, but here's the thing.
There's always a but, isn't there?
There is. Because while El Cid's been off winning hearts and minds, if not converting them, a rivalry has been brewing back in the Christian court. A rivalry with serious consequences.
I think I know where this is going. Garcia Ordóñez, am I right?
You are. And this wasn't just a personality clash. This was about power, influence, who had the king's ear, and it all comes to a head at the Battle of Cabra in 1079. It's a clash of ambitions, a battle that would cement El Cid's legend.
The Campeador is born. Tell me everything.
Oh, the Battle of Cabra. It wasn't just about armies clashing, this was personal. El Cid, he leads this force, Castilian, sure, but get this, he's got allied Andalusian troops fighting with him.
He's got Muslims fighting on his side. Against other Muslims. I mean, I know alliances were fluid back then, but that's wild.
That's El Cid for you,
Yeah.
always thinking a few steps ahead. And it worked. He absolutely crushed Ordóñez's forces. We're talking a decisive victory, sent a clear message to.
Don't mess with El Cid.
Something like that. But here's the irony. This victory, as impressive as it was, it actually planted the seeds for his downfall.
How so? Too much success.
Exactly. El Cid's star is rising. He's powerful, independent, commands loyalty from all sides, Muslims included, some people. They started to see him as a threat, maybe even Alfonso himself.
Which leads us to the Gormaz incident. The beginning of the end, at least for this chapter of El Cid's story. What happened? It seems like a minor thing, a raid on some town. Why would that be such a big deal?
Because it wasn't just any raid, right? It was a direct challenge to Alfonso's authority. Remember, El Cid's supposed to be working for the king, but he's out there acting on his own, making decisions that impact the entire kingdom.
So this raid on Gormaz, it was a step too far.
Way too far. Alfonso's got this delicate balance of power to maintain all these alliances, these truces, and El Cid, intentionally or not, just threw a wrench in the whole thing.
I can't imagine Alfonso was too happy about that.
You think? El Cid's exiled. Again. But this time it feels different, doesn't it? Like a clean break.
He's done playing by someone else's rules.
Exactly. He becomes this soldier of fortune, a leader for hire, could have disappeared easily. But instead, this is where El Cid really starts to build his legend.
Because he goes to work for the enemy. He ends up in Zaragoza, right? Working for Almupidir, another powerful Taifa ruler.
He does. And this is where things get really interesting, because now we're talking about a whole new level of complexity. He's not just fighting alongside Muslims, he's leading them, commanding a diverse army, potentially even fighting against other Muslims.
Talk about a tangled web. How did he even navigate that?
Remember those early days in Seville? Dealing with the Taifas, learning their customs, their politics. Those experiences served him well.
He learned how to speak their language.
Literally and figuratively. And he thrives, wins victories for Almucadir, Almanar, Morella. His reputation grows. But it's not just the victories themselves, it's how he does it. The way he commands loyalty, how he understands the game.
And all of this is happening while back in the Christian North. Well, things are changing there too, right?
Huge changes. While El Cid's building his power in Zaragoza, Alfonso achieves a massive victory. He conquers Toledo in 1085.
Okay, so Toledo. Big deal.
Huge deal. Think about it, Toledo. The old Visigothic capital, a symbol of Christian Spain, lost centuries ago. And Alfonso takes it back.
A real statement.
Oh yeah, a game changer. Suddenly Alfonso's not just holding on to the north, he's pushing south, aiming to reclaim everything.
Ambitious, but I'm guessing it's not that simple.
You know it never is. Because just when it seems like things couldn't get any more complicated, a new player enters the game.
Oh boy, I sense danger. Who are we talking about?
The Almoravids.
The Almoravids, okay. I'm assuming they're not here to make friends. Who were they?
Imagine this. A wave of Berber warriors sweeping across North Africa. These guys were serious. disciplined, fanatically religious, led by some seriously skilled commanders.
It was like trouble.
Oh, they were. And they weren't interested in playing games. They swept across North Africa, established this vast empire, and now they're setting their sights on Al-Andalus.
On a crusade.
Basically. They saw themselves as defenders of Islam, there to push back against the Christian advance.
Bad news for Alfonso.
You could say that. They were a game changer. And their arrival, well, it paved the way for El Cid's return from exile.
Talk about irony. The very guy Alfonso banished is now his best hope against this new threat.
Desperate times, right. Because the Almoravids, they weren't messing around. The Battle of Sagrajas in 1086, Alfonso's army. Crush. A complete disaster.
So what happens? Alfonso crawls back to El Cid with his tail between his legs.
Pretty much. Pride's a luxury you can't always afford when you're facing annihilation. El Cid gets his pardon. But it's not about forgiveness anymore, it's about survival.
So the stage is set for El Cid's return. What happens next? Where does Alfonso send his not-so-favorite but definitely most talented general?
Valencia. Alfonso sends him to Valencia.
Hold on, seriously. Back to the lion's den. I mean, wasn't that kind of El Cid's stomping ground before, the whole reason he got exiled in the first place?
Funny how things work out, right? But strategically, it made sense. Valencia was key. Right on the front lines, facing the Almoravid threat.
And who better to defend it than the guy who knew it better than anyone? Alfonso was really desperate, huh?
Let's just say he recognized El Cid's unique talents. So El Cid's back. But this time, he's not just some commander following orders. He's got a point to prove. And maybe, just maybe, he sees this as his chance to, well, take what he thinks is rightfully his.
I knew it. This wasn't just about saving Christian Spain. It was about power.
El Cid was never one to shy away from ambition, but he was also smart enough to play the long game. He knew the Almoravids were a serious threat, and he wouldn't risk everything just for a land grab, at least not right away.
So what does he do? Sits around behind Valencia's walls, twiddling his thumbs?
Yeah.
Not likely.
You know El Cid better than that. He jumps right in, starts shoring up defenses, but that's not all. He's also busy building alliances, playing the Taifa kings off against each other.
Always working those angles.
He was a master of it, and it worked, for a while anyway. He kept Valencia safe, but the tension was building. Because let's face it, the longer he held on to Valencia, the more powerful he became.
And the more of a threat he posed to, well, everyone. Alfonso included.
Exactly, and the inevitable finally happened in 1094, the Siege of Valencia. But this wasn't just some impulsive attack, this was years in the making. El Cid, he planned for this, waited for the right moment.
So why Valencia? What made it such a prize?
Think about it. Location, location, location. Valencia controlled the trade routes, connected the Islamic world with Christian Europe. Whoever held Valencia held the keys to wealth and power.
And El Cid wanted those keys. But a siege, that's a long drawn-out affair.
It was brutal. It lasted almost 2 years. El Cid, he cut off supply lines, exploited every single advantage, but he also used fear as a weapon.
Meaning?
Starvation, public executions. He knew how to break the will of his enemies, and it worked. Valencia fell in 1094.
A decisive victory, but at a cost.
There's always a cost, isn't there? But for El Cid, this was it. The culmination of everything he'd fought for. He was no longer just a soldier, a commander. He was a ruler.
King El Cid, essentially.
Not officially, no. But in all but name. He ruled Valencia. And here's the thing. He could have been ruthless. He could have imposed strict Christian rule, forced conversions, but he didn't.
He'd learned something from his time among the Muslims.
He'd learned a lot. He knew that tolerance, at least to a degree, would make his rule more secure. So he allowed Muslims to continue practicing their faith, even incorporated elements of Islamic law.
Pragmatism. Smart move.
Kept the peace. But he never forgot who he was, where he came from. He sought the Pope's blessing, wanted his rule legitimized by the church.
A good Christian boy, after all.
At heart, perhaps. But real life, it has a way of testing even the strongest faith. In 1097, tragedy strikes. El Cid's only son, Diego, is killed.
Oh, man, that's rough.
A devastating blow. And it changed El Cid, hardened him, some say. He knew his time was running out. He focused on securing his legacy, making sure Valencia would survive.
He did it.
He didn't get to see it. El Cid died in 1099 in his bed in Valencia. Not in battle, which is kind of ironic given his life.
A fitting end for a complex figure.
He was. But here's the thing about El Cid. His story, it didn't end with his death. That's when the legend truly took on a life of its own.
The poems, the songs, they made him larger than life.
They did. But even without the embellishments, El Cid's story is incredible. He was a brilliant military mind, a master strategist, but also a shrewd politician, a pragmatist who understood that sometimes to win, you have to be willing to compromise.
He was a product of his time, but also someone who defied easy categorization. He was both a warrior and a diplomat, a conqueror and a ruler who understood the value of tolerance. And his story continues to fascinate us centuries later because it forces us to confront the complexities of history, the gray areas where right and wrong aren't always so clear-cut. So the next time you hear the name El Cid, remember the man, not just the myth. And remember that history is full of these fascinating, complicated figures just waiting for us to rediscover them. That's all the time we have for our deep dive into the life of El Cid. Until next time, keep exploring the past, because the more we learn about where we've been, the better we understand where we're going.